Hello dear listeners, in today's episode of Women Heroes in Science, we'll be talking about a woman who works in the basement of a laboratory, opened the door to the nuclear age, but wasn't allowed to proceed, Lise Meitner. Of course, today we are with my dear Aiden. Well, Aiden, can we hear your thought?
Hello, Beren. It's a pleasure to be here, as always. I'm really excited that today we'll be talking about Lise Meitner, a name that truly represents the biggest guilt for the scientific world.
Aiden, Lise Meitner's name is known in physics circles today, but she's not as popular with the general public as Marie Curie, who is the first name to come to mind as a woman scientist. Yet, we are talking the splitting of the atom, or fission as it's called. Meitner deserves more recognition, right?
Absolutely. It's such a shame that her life was full of injustice.
I totally agree. Why is Meitner's story remembered more as a story of injustice rather than a success story?
Yeah, well, Meitner's story faces three major obstacles. Firstly, being a woman, which is the harsh truth of misogyny. Secondly, the Nazi oppression due to her Jewish origins. And thirdly, the attitude of her closest colleague, Otto Hahn, after the war.
If you'd like, let's start from the very beginning, from those famous carpenter's workshop days.
Take us back, Beren.
So, I read somewhere that when she went to Berlin, she wasn't even allowed to enter the laboratory through the main door. Is that true?
Unfortunately, it's true. It's 1907. She's coming to Berlin to work alongside well-known names like Max Planck, but at that time, in Prussia, it was considered dangerous and inappropriate for women to receive university education and, moreover, be present in laboratories. When she started working with Otto Hahn, Emil Fischer, the head of the Chemistry Institute, absolutely forbade Meitner from entering the main building.
So, where did this amazing woman work?
In an old carpenter's workshop outside the institute. Imagine this. She was conducting experiments in a basement without ventilation in the cold of winter. Even more tragic, because there were no women's restrooms in the building, Meitner had to walk to a hotel down the street to relieve herself.
Dude, must this woman's bladder burst?
Right! That is all while Otto Hahn is working upstairs in his cozy laboratory. The process of being wronged begins with physical obstacles, starting from day one.
Unbelievable. Nevertheless, she still doesn't give up. So how did the process leading to the real great discovery, the splitting of the atom, unfold? What were they trying to find at that time?
At that time, the scientists of the scientific world were like horse in a race to obtain heavier elements by fusing uranium with neutrons. Meitner was a physicist and Hahn was a chemist. It was a great team because without physical calculations, chemical results were just a riddle. However, with the annexation of Austria in 1938, the alarm bells started ringing for Meitner. Because of her Jewish origins, she could be arrested at any moment.
So she had to flee?
Yes, she escaped to Sweden on a midnight train, wearing only a few clothes and a diamond ring that Otto Hahn had given her as a bribe. But her departure did not stop her work. Even in exile in Sweden, she communicated with Hahn daily, with letters. Hahn was conducting experiments without comprehension.
So Hahn couldn't interpret the data he had in his hands in the lab?
Exactly. That, my dear friend, was because of his lack of the spark that Meitner had. Hahn wrote in his letters, "Lise, barium came out of uranium. This is impossible. Please, as a physicist, explain to us how this could be." It was at that moment, during the Christmas holidays of 1938, while walking the snow with her nephew Otto Frisch, that Meitner sat on a log and made that famous calculation.
What was the calculation?
Well, She realized that the nucleus behaved like a liquid drop and split in two. She calculated the mass during the splitting that was converted into energy. She used Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. The nuclear age began. The atom had been split, and the person who announced this to the world was Lise Meitner, on a log, in exile. Yet even in exile, she was the core of the discovery.
So far, everything seems like a collaboration, but why was the 1944 Nobel Prize in Chemistry awarded only to Otto Hahn? I mean, he wasn't even a chemist. Why was Meitner left out?
This is the darkest point of the Matilda effect.
Reminder guys, the Matilda effect is a systemic under-recognition, marginalization, and denial of credit for scientific achievements and innovations produced by women, with the credit often wrongly attributed to their male colleagues.
Thank you, Beran. In the report submitted to the Nobel Committee, Hahn presented Meitner's contribution as only secondary. Without Meitner's attendance, and therefore with the lack of a face-to-face explanation, the barium in Hahn's possession would have remained merely an experimental failure. But Hahn, driven by the ambition to revive German science after the war, argued that this achievement belonged entirely to German chemistry. Meitner's exile was a good excuse for the committee. She wasn't there during the experiment, they said.
Isn't that a very shallow excuse? Even today, scientists from the different countries publish joint papers.
Absolutely shallow. Moreover, Meitner was nominated for the Nobel Prize 48 times, but she never won. That's a record. Hahn, on the other hand, barely mentioned Meitner's name in his acceptance of the prize speech. He portrayed her not as a 30-year partner, but as if she were an assistant. My God, this is exactly what it means to be unfairly treated in science, having your work added to someone else's CV as a contribution.
How did Meitner react to this? Did she face a crossroad with science?
No, she had such a noble stance. In a letter to Hahn, she expressed her resentment, saying, "I am writing this letter to you only to preserve our friendship." And she never engaged in a public quarrel. She even refused to be called the mother of the atomic bomb after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. "I will have nothing to do with the bomb," she said. She was only after knowledge, not power, as men are.
Aiden, finally I would like to ask, looking back today, has Meitner's rights been restored in any way?
Well, she wasn't given a Nobel Prize, but history has been fairer after that. In 1997, element number 109 was named Meitnerium in her honor. There are very few women in the world whose names are given to an element. Otto Hahn's name, thankfully, is not in the periodic table.
I wouldn't have it in any other way.
Yeah. Also, her tombstone reads Lise Meitner, a physicist who never lost her humanity. This is a much greater medal than any stupid Nobel Prize, a timeless discovery with your name on it.
Truly an impressive life. In an era when attempts were made to render women invisible in science, no one could completely erase the genius that split into the atom. Eylül, thank you very much for this valuable information.
Thank you, Beran. Let's not forget that science is done not only in the laboratory, but also in our consciousness.
We've reached the end of this episode of Women Heroes in Science. Until the next episode, we'll meet again with the story of Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who discovered the first radio pulsars as a PhD student in 1967. Goodbye.
And don't forget to stay fair,
stay just.